Hey everybody, Barrett Smith here. So I want to talk about in this video is just a little bit behind what movement really is. So whenever I work with an athlete or work with athletes, these are some things to kind of think about when it comes to athletic development and athletic performance. So just to understand what movement is, I'm just going to have you think of reaching out and grabbing a glass of water. That's all I want you to think about. So everybody knows that if I'm utilizing my left side, that if I'm moving my left arm, that it comes from the opposite side brain. That is true. So if I'm moving this arm like this, it is coming from this side of the brain. So we're going to talk about a little bit of anatomy of movement here. So we're going to be using some big words. Don't worry. This is something you can kind of come back and rewatch and everything like that. So if I take this marker, think of this dotted line is the midline of your body. A midline, think of legitimately just cutting your body in half. You have the left side and a right side. So now, just by thinking about that, if we know that this side of the brain controls this side of the body, and I'm utilizing my left hand to grab that glass of water, we want to think of an area of the brain called the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is pretty much our movement lobe. It deals with voluntary movement. It deals with a lot of other things. So before I even reach out for that glass of water to grab to drink, my frontal lobe goes, there's a glass of water there. I am quite thirsty. I would like to have a sip of that. That sounds great. So the frontal lobe goes, hey, let's make that happen. It first communicates with an area of the brain called the basal ganglia. And to think of the basal ganglia is to think of it as it's the architect of movement. It comes up with the blueprints of movement to happen. So the basal ganglia goes, all right, frontal lobe, I got you. Here's the blueprints that we're going to use. So it sends a signal back to the frontal lobe saying, here's what we're going to do. The frontal lobe then in turn has to talk to a part of the brain on the opposite side of our body called the cerebellum. The cerebellum deals with the ABCs. Think about accuracy, balance, and coordination. It also deals with a lot more, but for right now, that's the easiest way to think of it. So the frontal lobe sends there's two pathways that it sends through. The first one goes through an area of our brainstem called the pons. All right, so we have a pons. It sends a signal, it goes down through the pons to the cerebellum. This track is called the cortico-pontocerebellar tract. Now the second one that it sends the signal through, let's use red here, is through an area of the brainstem called the medulla. So I'm going to abbreviate there, the medulla. So it sends it down through to the cerebellum. Now this track is called the cortico-olivocerebellar tract. Now why are these two tracks important is understanding that the cortico-pontocerebellar tract deals with error detection and error correction to make sure that you're able to reach how straight forward and back. There's no deviations from the movement that you want to do. The second one, the cortico-olivo tract that goes to the medulla, deals with rhythm and timing. Think about speed. How fast do you want to grab it? It's probably a full glass of water, so you don't want to necessarily be like, watch-ow! You probably want to be a little bit more gentle with it and making sure that the rhythm and timing of it so you don't spill the water. So now, after it sent these two plans, the cerebellum goes, hey, frontal lobe, I got it. Let's make it, let's go. So then, in turn, the frontal lobe sends another signal down, over, and down to the extremity. It's called the corticospinal tract. That's not an S. Corticospinal tract. And this is the actual track that basically connects our brain to our body. So whenever we move, that's the track that's mainly getting uplifted and activated. All right. So now, as I'm reaching out for that coffee, that spinal tract's being activated, but all of the signals that go back up to kind of make sure that we're doing it right get sent to the cerebellum. So all of the mechanoreceptors, all those movement receptors are sending signals back up to my cerebellum. The cerebellum then in turn goes, hey, this looks like those two plans, those two spinal tracts, that blueprint that the basal ganglia made the frontal lobe sit down says, hey, that looks like what we're trying to do. Frontal lobe, you're doing great, keep it up. Or it goes, hey, frontal lobe, you're not doing good, fix it. Then this process happens all over again within milliseconds. Very, 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 very fast signal sending here. So in other words, the cerebellum either goes, frontal lobe, you're doing great, or frontal lobe, you're doing it not good, fix it. So the key notes to take from here. Frontal lobe talks to the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia goes, hey, here's the blueprints to make it happen. The frontal lobe then sends two different versions of the blueprints to the opposite side cerebellum through these two tracks, the cortico-pontocerebellar tract and the cortico-olivocerebellar tract. The cerebellum goes, hey, I got it. Frontal lobe then sends a signal through the corticospinal tract, which then makes the motions happen. Now, all of that afferent signals goes back to the cerebellum on the same side. The cerebellum then communicates back to the frontal lobe to say, hey, you're doing exactly what you said you're going to do. This is great. Or it goes, hey, frontal lobe, you're messing it up. We need to correct things. All right. So these are some things that I personally think about when it comes to just working with athletes and making them perform at their absolute best. This is a very, very, very simplified explanation of really what's happening up there, but it gets the point across. Well, I hope you liked this video and you hope everything that I have to talk for. If you have any questions or any comments, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section or anything like that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.